Productions. Praxis Pedagogy exists to position our teaching and learning practice within different methodologies. We want to construct a guild of educators dedicated to designing a difference in our own teaching and learning and in our students' experience. I never get used to that sound.
They should ask me to record that.
They should. They should.
Recording in progress.
Right. You dummy. You just press record and now I got to tell you that recording is in progress. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, it's not for you. It's for the other. Okay, here we go. 3, 2, 1. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Praxis Pedagogy Podcast. So glad you tuned into this episode. We are picking up again Appreciative Inquiry. Let me say that again. Appreciative Inquiry in Higher Education, a Transformative Force by Jeannie Cockle and Joan MacArthur Blair. Shout out to Jeannie and Joan. Thanks for listening. And we're all back from holidays and ready to get back into this fantastic book. We're going to be talking about chapter 7 specifically, maybe dip our toes into chapter 8 because it's a great resource. And maybe we'll talk about that a little bit at the end, but we want to focus in on chapter 7, being an appreciative inquiry practitioner in higher ed. Hello, ladies. How you doing?
Good morning. Yeah, good.
Very good. So nice to be back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, to leave the holiday world, but really great to be back.
Yeah, it's good. And I think being back into work in the first week and refreshing this, going over this book and looking back at some of the things that we've talked about and these particular chapters and preparing for the autumn, the fall season. This is what we need to get us going. This and coffee. This will get us. Us prepared for this upcoming semester. So yeah, I'm excited.
A little Baileys in the coffee wouldn't hurt either. But
no, that's for remote work, not for in office. We're all on campus now.
As we were saying off air, remote from the boat. Yeah.
Yes.
Sally, how you doing? You're off for a chunk of time, girl.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I finally had a space where I could take the holiday that I'd accrued over the last couple of years and excuse me, it was just amazing. It was absolutely amazing. And I realized how much, I've heard you both say this, like we all need time to recharge, but it really was a true break. And I feel really good and ready to go. And just, what Lucy said there, this is such a great book. Like we keep coming back to this message of how valuable this book is to us as educators and to, in the leadership roles that we play. But my goodness, chapter 7 is a great start to the semester in September, especially a semester like this one in 2021. Where nothing is normal, nothing looks familiar, and so much is unknown. And for me, this is a very hopeful way of starting off this semester.
Yeah, no kidding. It's almost like, okay, we're 19, 20 months in. We think we would have got it figured out by now, but it just feels like we're just juggling different things. We haven't really stopped juggling, right?
No, and we also have to reimagine now. So this is why this chapter, reminding ourselves like how we got here, the journey we've been on, and how we can use those experiences moving forward rather than to go back to 2019. How can we continue on, this great path forward, and where do we want to be in the next year or 3 years or 5 years? So this chapter is really good to kind of reframe your thinking.
Yeah, for sure. So let's start off right with the foundations, because that first paragraph really kind of sets the whole tone. And I think it rings very true that practitioners bringing AI into higher education need to deeply understand the world of teaching and research and be grounded in the theories of higher and adult education practices. And then facilitating AI in higher ed needs to be grounded in other facilitating practices. It almost sounds like a no-brainer, but I'm glad that they said that out loud, right? What do you think?
Absolutely, Tim. That was music to my ears, really was, because one of the things that I always struggle with is, and there was actually a debate on Twitter the other day, and it was around learning styles. And so, that always gets people fired up. And somebody was saying, finally, my sister is now taking her master's, and she has come to me and said, after 5 years of arguing this, I now understand why the learning styles mindset has been debunked because I've got it now. And I sort of joined into the conversation, and I said, what always fascinates me is that quite often those that speak to the strengths of, the learning styles, let's say mindset rather than theory, then claim to be social constructivists. Well, you can't be both. And yet they're arguing both. So when we actually take these ideas, and we need to ground them in theories. We need to ground them in educational theories. And when we do that, we can see that we've got conflicting ideals as such. So when I read this around, from Jeannie and Joan about being an AI practitioner, we do need to ground our practice in educational theory. And it just, it really highlighted for me those times where I've been in workshops and I've been quite aware that the facilitator does not have a deep understanding of educational theories and practices. And that disconnect it causes more problems really than value. So that, this really speaks to the strengths of, say, for ourselves and other educators out there and other practitioners out there, why this is just another tool that we bring into our toolkits.
Yeah.
On top of all that other, that journey. And Lucy, you just mentioned a minute ago about our own journeys. So I'm going to hand over to you because you probably want to hop in and speak to that.
Hopping. Yeah, no, we were talking about this just offline. Like this chapter was, we talk about the three of us, and also, Chad and Flynn, who we in constant communication like all the time. But one of the mantras that connected us all was that, life is an apprenticeship, and being able to connect that educational theory with your experiences and your lifelong learning, like that's the magic right there. Like that's what that binds it all together. And, when in the beginning of this chapter, they talk about, the storytelling piece and how you can use that in many different ways when you're facilitating these types of workshops. And one of the things that I think I've spoken to Sally and Tim about before was when I was taking my master's degree, my professor at the time, Dr. Michael Ling, did an exercise with us called "This is what I believe and this is why." And basically it was a time for us to do our storytelling piece, to kind of tell the whole class how we got to this classroom today and the steps that we took to get there, and the different experiences that we had to prepare us to be in this classroom. And it was in the middle of our master's degree. So we were like a year in at this point, that this is the class that brought us all together. We finally understood each other. We finally understood the direction that each of us wanted to go to. And even though we all fanned in and we met in this one point and we were all going to leave and fan out into do different things, we had to share these stories in order for us to understand, support each other, and make it a really rich experience. So that was one activity where storytelling, it really propelled my thinking in my master's degree. And then we got to learn about 20 other different experiences that led them to this room. So use of storytelling and that narrative, it's so powerful, and there's so many different ways you can use it. So that piece of, what we talk about, life as an apprenticeship, and bringing all that experience in with your understanding of theory or pedagogy, the different needs of different learners, like I said, it's magic. It's what makes you a good facilitator, because you bring everyone together through their vision, not through your vision of how they should be together. So
And absolutely, Lucy, and what you're talking there with Dr. Michael Ling is that he made space for that conversation, And for me, that was the first big message that I got from Jeannie and Joan in chapter 7, was that they're making space for these conversations. And I thought about, like, very quickly around all the times where there has been space given for this opportunity. And also the facilitation model, like they talk about the circle, and they talk about why the circle is, why that changes. I think that changes the hierarchy within the group as such. And I thought about times when I have been in these kind of conversations, but either my voice has been excluded, or I've been very, very aware that somebody else's voice has been excluded. Like, so where you see that happen. So sometimes, facilitators feel that they're making space for stories, but they're only making space for stories that they value. So there's somewhere they're making this sort of judgment call. Whereas, the model that, or one of the models that Joan and Jeannie suggest really, and they speak to it, first of all, they talk to the group about why we're taking this physical structure of a circle. And a colleague and friend of mine, Rita Gower, for her master's, she actually focused in on the talking circle as a practice that she implemented with her students. And one of the key elements was that you only listened, you didn't respond. And I think that just even putting that into play, and maybe that's something, I don't know, Lucy, whether you did that, but in your sessions, in your masters, but just even that concept, the first time I heard that concept, like, oh, right. So your role isn't to respond to what people have said. So it shifts how we normally interact, and again, opening up more space for storytelling.
Yeah, I love that. And it brings me back to all these facilitation opportunities I've had to do. And I love facilitating. And the fun part for me is taking everyone's story and weaving it together to have a narrative for the whole group. And that's powerful. And like what you were saying, Lucy, that when you were together for a year in your master's program and you did that one activity, or you had that one class with that one professor, and that solidified it all for you, it makes me think that had you known the backstories of your fellow classmates sooner, you would have had that experience sooner. The argument against that would be, well, you don't really know each other that well yet. So, doing that exercise may not have carried the depth of impact because you don't have that time together to kind of be the glue, the cohesion for all of that. I tend to push back or disagree with that argument a tiny bit, because from my perspective, I love getting that narrative out early, because that now sets the tone for everything that we do down the road from there. So for me, the facilitation piece, when we're bringing stories together, and whether it's around a table, and I like doing it in a U shape if the number of participants are large enough. That way everyone can still see each other, but then I have the opportunity to kind of move in and out of that middle part of the U and do some facilitation magic. And I'm not the first one to use that word on this podcast, Lucy. Brought it in. So
you won't be the last.
Yeah.
I agree with that. In some cases, I think in this particular case, we needed that year to start to build relationships so that we trusted enough to speak our true story. Because I think if we'd have done this earlier on, we would have given the story that we wanted people to, to believe about us, or, the Insta story, the Insta story that this is my wonderful life and this is the perfect life. We needed that year to get to know each other so we could get to the grit and really be vulnerable and really explain. There were a few tears, there were a few I need a minute, there was a few breaks that we had to take. So it was a very powerful session. So in this particular case, I think it was done at exactly the right time, because then it propelled us for for our final year.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking about that because ethnography, that's what kept coming to my mind. And like I read a few ethnographic studies during my master's, and I found them so powerful. And when I was looking at which methodology to use for my research, ethnography really comes front and center. But you need 2 years to go and live in that community within that particular culture. And so obviously, most of us can't just disappear for 2 years, whatever, but we do live within the culture of trades education. And I'm just thinking, so, somebody looking in and listening to our stories as such, that is that, ethnography, that is what it is. You're learning about the values within these whole cultures, within these systems. And I'm thinking with your case, the example you're giving, Lucy, about how with your masters, you'd been together 1 year at that point, you had become a culture of your own. Like I believe every master's cohort creates their own, don't they, their own culture. And so, I think that it would be great, wouldn't it, if Dr. Michael Ling would like to actually join in on a session and
I think that would be...
Yes, I think we might tag him in this one.
Yeah.
Because it
just
would be wonderful.
Right now.
Yes, it would be wonderful if he would join us and really talk about the timing of that activity he did. Because I think, again, it would be great to hear his story and his
reflection on ethos and, all these different things that connects this. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
totally.
So absolutely. I think it would be really good. I mean, and then it doesn't have to be that intense. Like the storytellers, like in the chapter, they talk about, where you can all tell a story about a time where you've worked on a project or in a meeting or a committee, a good example of group work, a good example of that. And everyone kind of shares, I did this once and it was really great. And then that's how that's the activity you choose to do in that session. So again, it's not something that as a facilitator, you have to really, plan for. You can say, I'm going to plan to ask how they want to move forward. What's one of the best activities that they've done in order to come together or work in a group setting or whatever that example may be. So, storytelling it can be used in such different ways. It doesn't have to be, tears, tears and everything, and lifelong experiences. It can be micro things that can really make it set a standard or set precedent in that particular meeting.
On that, really, that's so valuable what you've just said there, Lucy, because it we look at this as 1 day workshops, 2 day workshops or longer or whatever. But I know one of the things I really picked up on what Jeannie and Joan were saying about creating this culture of appreciative inquiry. So this is one of the things that I think about, the sort of the sustainable practice of this, and how does this become immersed in the culture of, whether it's a faculty or whether we're looking at an institutional sort of mindset. So this practice of storytelling, it's not that it sort of lives in isolation and we say, okay, we're going to start this today with this storytelling. How do we embed it into our practice, into our culture of our faculties, our institutions? So there is, this constant reflecting and, like you said, living the apprenticeship. So we're always learning, we're always telling our stories, and just even having that opportunity to reflect on when do you feel most alive and most passionate, really that passionate. And Tim, I really picked up on what you said earlier about, and even when you said it, I'm sure when you listen to this recording, you'll hear it too. When you said, I love facilitating. I mean, I've been fortunate to be in the,
I love it when you facilitate.
Yes. I've been, either alongside you or I've been in, the audience as such, or in that community. And it truly shows, that passion shows. And anybody listening that was at the, BC campus. I can't remember
Cascadia.
what the last Cascadia. And you facilitated for 3 days, and it was just wonderful. And I'm sure, you know, for you reflecting on, or maybe let's ask you about what you
let's not tell you how you feel.
Yes. Yeah, let's actually use an AI approach. Yeah.
Well, thanks. I'll come back to the book for the starting point, and then I'll answer your question. I love the sentence on page 137 that the building of facilitation skills is a living apprenticeship. Because as apprentices, you know, you're not going to learn everything in 4 years or 2 years or 3 years or however long your apprenticeship is. And then when you're a journey person and you get that red seal endorsement, you still haven't learned everything. And as you get better at your trade, at your craft and your skills, you realize there's still so much more to learn. And just when you thought you had a really good handle on something, technology changes, which changes how you integrate with what you're doing. And so you never really stop learning. And so I really love that piece of facilitation. And then when we did the Cascadia thing, I was kind of bummed that it wasn't face-to-face, because I love feeding off the energy. I love, you know, the eye contact. I love the whole thing.
Feel the room. Yeah.
Feel the room. And I love adding to the energy. I just love everything about it. But it being all online, I thought through how can I bring that feeling even to the virtual. And so I tried to really focus in on just, I don't know how to even say it. I just tried to focus in on not speaking as much, if that makes sense. And just, you know, really practicing listening and being there. And there were a couple times in that conference where, oh man, I felt like I was dancing for 4 hours, and it was only a 30-minute session. Right. And, yeah. And those ones stretched me. Like, I facilitated for a long time, and those stretched me. But you know what, at the end of it, I was thankful for the opportunity to be a part of it. And I guess that's why I love facilitation so much, because I love just taking the spotlight and putting it on other people. And yeah, I you got me speechless, Sally.
Well, you did it very well. And one of the things that I learned from you, because I watched you and listened to you for 3 days, and that actually, you know, that's so interesting that you should say that you focus really on listening rather than talking. And you and I chatted last week about the digital tool shedding one, and you asked me this question at the end of it, and I said that was one of the things I was really, you know, focusing on, was listening more, communicating with those that that are not usually in my circle. Who do I not usually listen to? You know, going outside of that. One of the things I really took away from your facilitation of those 3 days, Tim, was your questions. You asked questions that really were meaningful to the person that you were interviewing at the time, and you provided that space for them to tell their story. And I think sometimes that, you know, maybe you're given the space like I just did to you right now, just threw you right there. And, you know, but you had listened intently to their presentations in order to structure your questions. And you know, for most presenters, you maybe had 2, 3, 4 questions for them, but the questions were, I mean, it showed that you had really, you know, engaged in their presentation and allowed them to sort of speak further to you know, the particular topic that we're presenting on. So I thought that was, you know, that's a huge strength, asking very simple questions, but they have to be structured, don't they, in the way that is meaningful to the person that you're speaking to. And maybe that's something as well with the listening. You know, in order for the question to be meaningful to your, you know, your partner in that conversation, it does require you to have listened to them prior to that as well.
Yeah, and continually be an active listener so that you can follow up with a meaningful question, because you don't know when you're live like that facilitating, you have to be ready for that they might answer a question and it won't connect to the next question that you had originally prepared. So you just have to kind of think on your toes there as well. And yeah, it was a really good experience to watch you and also respond to the presentations in a meaningful way, rather than like, oh, great, thanks, that was a really good topic on, cheers for that. So it was like, yeah, so let's move it on now. So yeah, it was really good. And when you said before you hope it would have been face to face, and this facilitation piece will connect also with the circle practice. But, and they talk about in the chapter about there being physical constraints that may prevent, this meaningful experience in this circle practice. And I think going through what we've been through in the past 2 years, people may have thought that, doing these types of events online, you won't feel, have that sense of connection or that, that meaningful connection. But I actually, I took part in a healing circle a couple of months ago, and it was all done online. And we all felt so connected that when I actually, at the end of it, when I actually turned my computer off and turned around and I was in my own house, I was like, oh my God, yeah, like I'm at home. I need a minute. I need to go and make a cup of tea and just like sit and have a minute, because I was so involved in the process of how this facilitation works. So sometimes they talk about in this, like, move the rooms around, in this space, it might be the physical constraints might be, being online. But it doesn't mean that you can't make meaningful connections and discuss meaningful stories and allow time to connect, even though it can be a bit awkward online because you can't read body language and you don't want to speak over other people. So
we'll listen. I think the thing is as well that, going back to the I've forgotten the title of it again. I want to say Camtasia at Cascadia.
Camtasia.
I know. I've been immersed in Camtasia for the last couple of days. The presenters had my full attention. They truly did. And, Jeannie and Joan, they speak about these further in this chapter. They speak about the conversations that happen at formal, events where, you listen to the presenter, but the corridor conversations, the pub conversations. And these are the conversations that, trying to bring the space for these conversations. And yet in the online environment, when you go to a conference, when you attend a conference, there were times where I was trying to work at the same time, and that was not good. But so many times you had your full attention on that presenter. And I mean, I have my screen set up, so whoever is speaking, they take up the full screen. So Lucy, when you were chatting just a moment ago, like I was very aware that I had my full attention on you. Whereas if I was in a room of 20 people, there are always these other distractions, and we like them. They're familiar and all of that kind of stuff. But I do think that the online space, especially when we think about conferences, has provided new opportunities, that there's been lots of real plus points around. And if we reflect on them and think about, the opportunities for listening and storytelling, I think it's been quite powerful.
Yeah, I would agree. And thinking back to what you said earlier, Sally, one of the things that I try to work on, and I think what other facilitators who I really look up to have modeled for me, is that idea of bias and just kind of putting that on a shelf or in the suitcase as you enter the room, and being willing to listen to other people's perspectives. Because quite honestly, to use a metaphor, I'm not sure how how much it'll stand up. But my metaphor for facilitating is very much like a waiter at a really high-end restaurant, right? Where you know that they're there because things come and go, but they never really interrupt your time with the people that you're with, right? Like they just have this.
They're good at their job.
This canny ability to just
full of food.
Exactly. They sneak in and they fill your wine glass, or they fill your water, or they bring bread, or they know everything there is to know about the menu. So if you're like, yeah, how's this? And they're like, well, that's really good, but you compare it with this, and then they just go and they let you do your thing, right? So there's aspects of that where I just think that I try to bring that when I try to facilitate.
I love that.
And they listen to every word that's being said. I mean, I've been, it's a long time ago now, but I've been in the restaurant where you'll have waiters that actually stand very close by the whole time. And like you say, this is high end.
Yeah.
When it appears that they're not listening to anything that's going on, but you know that they are actually listening to every word. They can hear everything. They hear the tones of the conversations. And I think that, as you're saying, Tim, that facilitation should seem absolutely seamless as it goes, and really the people should not be aware of the facilitator. It's just more of the experience that the facilitator provided.
Yeah. I like that analogy. Like the best restaurants I've been to have been because of the service and not necessarily the food. And so I there's definitely restaurants that I could name that I'm like, wow, they could kind of just slide in, support when you need help, guide you and not make you feel awkward to be in that place, in that setting. And so I really do like that analogy. I wanted to ask you what you thought about the setting agreements piece, because I thought I was doing a good job of that, and I realized I actually wasn't. Well, when they talk about in the classroom setting, so something that I've always done as a teacher is set up like classroom agreements, like as a whole. So I would normally invite maybe one of the counselors or somebody else to support the process. And then the class would come up with a classroom agreement as to how they expect, the next 10 months to go. But what I really liked in the chapter was that they said to focus on what is wanted, not what is not wanted. Mm-hmm. And I was like, dang it. I thought I was doing a good job. It was like, don't be late. No, it's not like that. But I really like how just by doing that, the whole attitude and the whole, I was talking about the, disorganization at my son's school this morning. But just by flipping that context can make, just by one little thing can make such a difference. Like instead of saying like everyone must, no one should be late, like just say we appreciate it if everyone could, arrive on time and be then when they're in the classroom. And this is how we're going to practice that. Like it's so much more meaningful, and definitely some tips I'm going to share out to, to other educators. It's like when you go into a business and you see on the door, like no dogs, no food, no phones, no clothes, like, you're like, oh my God, like, can I, and you walk in, you're quiet and you feel like, it's just, and I feel like sometimes you can set that up in your classroom with all these don'ts, so I really like that piece.
And the problem with the don'ts as well, Lucy, is then so we were really fortunate about 5-6 years ago at VIU to be selected as a program for an enhancement project. And so one of the, we went through the whole backward design process, which you may or may not have heard me talk about in the past.
Maybe once or twice. Yeah. Mentioned it.
But our facilitator there, Bill Roberson from CIL at VIU, we actually worked on this idea of the class agreement there. And it was then when we shifted our class agreement to actually what is the desire? Like, how do we, the positive? And what we found was, as soon as we took away these will not statements to these real, like, this is, we appreciate this.
Yeah.
We want, this is what we want. This is how we want to operate all together as such. It takes away the role of the policing. So prior to that, when we had thought, you know, we had started doing this, and to be fair, I think that lots of us learned this idea in our PIDP programs. And so it was a step in the right direction. We've got to value that step. But what it enabled was many of the students in the classroom would take on this policing role. So they would be talking about so-and-so was doing that. We said we will not use our phones in the classroom, you know, whereas, you know, if we change this around to, I love their 2 feet rule or something. If you're not participating, if you're not giving and you're not engaging, then use the 2 feet rule and leave the classroom. So giving individuals that autonomy to make the decision. So instead of saying, do not be on your phone in the classroom, like in the classroom, we will engage in the, you know, in the activity, or we will choose to leave, or something like that, you know, along those lines. It really shifted the culture around how we were going to aspire to, you know, collaborate together, cooperate together, rather than enabling those to become little policing officers that were telling tales on everybody all the time.
Yeah, no kidding. And I've used the term charter for a number of meetings that I've done face to face. And you're right, like focusing it or framing it in the positive. So instead of saying we won't be late, we've used the term we value being on time. Yeah. Because it leaves room for, like, you know, if you're at a conference and let's say some emergency comes up in the morning and you're just going to be late, right? And you come in, it's like, well, you know what? We value starting on time, but there may be a reason why you show up late. So
we don't want you to kill yourself to get here. No.
Yeah, exactly. It creates space for people to go, okay, wait a minute. There might be something going on outside that I don't know about that.
Absolutely.
You know, so if Tim shows up late, that's okay. Right. And you're right, Lucy, like the charter now becomes the police person. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Where it's not Tim, the facilitator, now has to be Tim, the enforcer. Right. Where it's a facilitation or a charter piece that all of you have worked on to build. So now, like you said, Sally, you now all become part of the enforcement team, if we want to label it that way. Right.
And it takes away that binary of right and wrong, doesn't it? Because when we live with that binary thinking, so you're late, we said we wouldn't be late, you're therefore bad Tim, late, you know. So we do that because we've learned to, you know, do that pattern. So really coming back to, you know, the book again, that shift, because that's what the authors talk about, this whole creating this culture. And as we reflect on our practices, so it's, you know, so great, Lucy, like you're saying, you know, you're reflecting on how you've done this in the past. And I think all throughout this chapter, because they provide so many examples, and this is what makes this book just such an incredible resource, especially September 2021, and just gives you examples of how to structure these questions and how to work through those series of questions, and yet not provide any answers whatsoever. Really, it is empowering for the facilitator and the participants, trusting that I'm going to say the right answers, and I don't mean the right answers. That's too funny, talking of binary thinking here. But
best practices is even worse.
What will emerge is what is the desire of the whole session.
Yeah,
that's good.
I agree. Good. I mean, I think too, like just being intentional with it. Like you think you're being, you know, we're going to do this classroom agreement, everyone's going to be part of it. But then just thinking, you know, deeper again, like, okay, but let's make it positive. So, and facilitating that discussion. So someone says, well, I don't think that we should be able to, you know, be on our phones or come in late, and then just discuss that, like where does that stem from? What is the, and they talk, you know, Julie and Joan talk about this. What is the reason behind this agreement? and then having a bit of a chat about it so people understand, oh, Lucy doesn't want us to be late. Well, actually, it's not that, but we want to make the most of our 2 hours together. And maybe if a majority of people are late, we have to shift the time, or but one thing with time, and again, I'll go back to Dr. Michael Link, has really made you think about how you use time. And there was I never want students to drive too fast, or rush or run, or and get injured, or colleagues or anyone like that, in order to be in a classroom where I'd rather them show up feeling like I'm not rushed, I'm prepared, I want to engage, and I'm this morning just didn't work out, I'm going to take a breath and get into the activity. So I really do like that resource. And again, like you said, Sally, this is such a good book for going into September 2021.
And it's the differences, isn't it? It's the difference between an instructor that finds you at break time and says, thanks for making it to class today. And, or, providing that space for you to talk about why you were late, rather than, when I first started teaching, I was actually told that I had to then write up a ticket, and at break time, I had to go and hand that student a ticket. Well, over the years, I learned that it would be, absolutely horrendous, life-changing situations that had occurred to them, either that, the day before or early that morning. There was a couple of several incidents I can recall. And their practices was to then go and reprimand the student, rather than saying, how can I help? What do you need? And that kind of brings me to one thing that I was noticing in the book as well. Another practice that I learned very early on was the SWOT acronym, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And I loved it how they said, shifting this to the SOAR, and really looking at strengths, opportunities, aspirations, and results. This is a whole mindset. So again, just noticing in our practices, our everyday practices, because we can prepare to deliver a workshop and create our agenda and cross-check our agenda to the SOAR acronym there, but it really is our everyday practices, isn't it? That are we living by these? And I think this is how this is going to be one of my goals, at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day, just thinking about my interactions with others. And maybe people listening to this, they're going to write in and just say, by the way, no, you weren't focusing on the SOAR model there. But,
I know.
Discover, dream, design, destiny. I think just living that. And I'm sure, as the author said, it is a journey. It's going to be a lifelong journey.
Absolutely. And I think this is a good place to segue into our final comments, because chapter 8 is chock full of examples on how to do this. And we'll leave that for the listeners to read into chapter 8 and dig in. We would all recommend grab your favorite glass of wine or coffee or tea or water even, and just soak into chapter 8 and let it permeate into your practice. Any last words about chapter 7 and 8?
I would like, I really liked, and actually I wrote it down and I thought I'm going to stick this on my wall. When they talk about open space technology, and there were 4 different points, which maybe you can put into the show notes, Tim, but, and so when you look at facilitating, we've talked about time, we've talked about agreements, when we're facilitating that practice. And this kind of sums it up, because it says, whoever comes are the right people, whenever it starts is the right time, whenever whatever happens is the only thing that could have, and when it's over, it's over. And that can work in hundreds of thousands of different settings that you're in. To a conversation with your husband at home, to facilitate in a room of 400 people, to having a learning, talking, healing circle that you're part of, you know, whatever it is. So those 4 points on page 225 or 226, can't read my own handwriting, were, you know, I really did like those points.
Nice.
I think that's lovely, Lucy, because that really, you know, reaffirms what I was saying earlier about this shift in the mindset from wrong and right, and like just applying what you said to every aspect of their life, whether it's parenting, whether it's with their colleagues, whether it's dinner parties, and just accepting more what life is and learning is. So yeah, I think that's a really wonderful takeaway.
That's amazing. And yeah, and I love that sentence near the end. I think a couple times we've touched on it. No one ever arrives at being a master facilitator. It's a journey of a lifetime of learning, experimenting, and attempting new ideas. And that's the great thing about this, is that we never arrive. We just get better at it, and we focus in on some areas that need some growth. And for those of you who are listening to the podcast, you need to buy this book if you haven't bought it already, because we are not covering all of the chapters. We are not covering all the content in the chapters. We will be covering all the chapters. But we haven't covered all the content, so you need to buy this book and get into it and dig into it, and then don't be afraid to start practicing it. We're just so thankful to Jeannie and Joan for writing this. And we know that you're listening, Jeannie and Joan, so thanks again. And we will be reaching out to Dr. Michael Ling. And so I'm not sure if he listens to the podcast, but Dr. Ling, if you see an email from me, respond. Don't throw me in the trash bin.
Yes.
But yeah, really, really good. And if I would just have one parting word to say, is that life is an apprenticeship. We never stop learning, and we need to keep getting better at our craft and our practice, because people depend on us, not to just get stuff done, but to open up opportunities for others to grow and to show, right? And so having said that, thanks again, ladies. This has been a pleasure.
Pleasure as always. Thank you.